You find yourself walking down a fog-wreathed path in the midst of some forest, unsure of how you arrived in this strange place. Nothing can be seen besides the dirt road before you and the shadowy suggestion of immense trees to either side. Yet, when you attempt to turn your head and further explore the surroundings, something prevents you from doing so, as if your neck is locked into place by an invisible cage. Next, you try to halt your slow march down the road, but once more your body refuses to respond. Panic rises in your chest. What's happening? Why are you only able to control your eyes? Terror builds in the pit of your stomach, and with a great surge of desperate effort, you finally manage to exert your will and bring the constant walking to a lurching stop. Suddenly, your body returns to your control, and a tidal wave of sensations crash down. Pain and exhaustion scream from every limb, and you collapse, aching legs unable to even stand for another instant. Lying in agony upon the earth, the world spins as you try and understand what's happening. Then you feel it. A strange scratching at the back of your mind. The creeping sensation of something else in your head. Like a spider made of shadows creeping out from some hidden hole in your consciousness. A whisper dances in your ears. The distant suggestion of someone's voice, even though you can see you are alone. Just then, one sensation eclipses all others, as a pulse races down your right arm. How did you not notice it before now? You are holding something. Something metallic and heavy. As you manage the extreme effort needed to crane your neck, you glance up just enough to see your fingers gripping an elegant sword of ancient design. Before you can consider where you acquired such a relic, however, something in the reflection of the steel blade catches your eye. Just past your exhausted features, you can see a shadow hovering over you. Glowing red eyes stare down upon your prone form, and another pulse surges through your arm. It's cold, but calming somehow. The pain in your limbs ebbs away, and the shadow leans down next to your ear. The whispers return, words you don't understand filling your mind. Another pulse. You feel so tired now, the yawning abyss of sleep calling you back to the sweet embrace of oblivion. The shadowy creature melts into your prone body, which starts to crawl back to its feet. The blade pulled closer until it fills your darkening vision. In the cold metal's reflection is your face, but twisted into a sneer filled with deep contempt. As your body resumes the march to some unknown destination, the last thing you see before slipping into unconsciousness once more are red, burning eyes. Oh, you're awake. I hope I did not disturb your rest. I merely have come to drop off your food. I must admit, I am quite impressed with your progress so far out in the garden. Having fresh vegetables and fruit in the house is just a delight. Since you are up now, how about a reward for your efforts? I will share with you the story of a beast so mighty, so powerful, that even the strongest of demons would find themselves brushed aside like pests. Before I continue, however, are you all right? Your hands are shaking. Just tired from your exertions yesterday. Are you sure? Very well. If that is all, I am confident today's meal will have you feeling restored in no time. I prepared quite the potent salad, using some exotic ingredients that originate from a rare oasis located in the burning lands of Araby. In any event, allow me to reveal to you the largest known monster that can be found roaming the old world to this very day. Of the many adventures I have embarked upon over the years, the most exciting happened to be when I was trekking through the northern mountains of Bretonnia, known as the Pale Sisters. I had been looking for a village in that area, as rumors persisted of an immense dragon named Maladrex having taken it for himself, for none had heard from the peasantry of the region in over a month. This in and of itself would not have been noteworthy, but apparently this particular village had a reputation for being well protected by a respectable garrison, due to producing delicious wine quite favored by the nobility of Cron. For it to have suddenly stopped sending shipments and fall totally silent was quite concerning. When I finally crested a rather steep cliff overlooking my destination, the true cause of the village's silence was impossible to miss. Sitting amid the large plateau where the Bretonian peasants had chosen to build their humble homes was a giant, of such staggering size that I thought it was some bizarre illusion. I stood upon that mountainside for a good while, trying to fathom the colossus before me, when my attention was drawn to insects moving around one of the creature's immense hands. Terror gripped my chest when I realized those were not bugs. They were men. The peasants were alive and seemed to be bringing a large collection of barrels to be placed next to the giant's resting body. The monster leisurely picking at his teeth with what must have once been some tall mountain pine. From my vantage point, the terrified fools were smaller than the brute's smallest finger, making me quite glad that I remained yet undiscovered. My natural desire to flee was quickly suppressed by my growing excitement, as I had finally encountered one of the exceedingly rare Bonegrinder giants. You see, my dear student, I had long believed that these titans had been exterminated in the old world, as the legends about them always ended in their deaths. Tales such as those of Borkil the Bloody-Handed, a mighty Chaos Lord who had hunted and killed the Bonegrinder giant named Malgrung, though he only managed the task thanks to sipping from the legendary Chalice of Chaos. Then, of course, the dwarfs tell of how King Ungrim Ironfist of Karakadrin had struck down one such colossus in the year following the battle at the gates of Kislev, though whether that was truly a Bonegrinder or just an immense specimen of the typical variant is a tad unclear. Yet no words can truly express the strange horror of seeing such a monster in the flesh. I had heard the myths about the fabled Sky Titans from the ancient Giant Lands, and knew that the creature before me was the closest thing alive to those fallen behemoths. Here was a creature that could step over castle walls with laughable ease, and pluck entire ships from the ocean with but a single hand. As I marveled over the mind-bending size of the tremendous being, it stirred to consider the mass of barrels that had been collected beside it. Shooing away the peasants with a grumble that shook the rock beneath me, even from that great distance, the Bonegrinder giant proceeded to lazily pick up the entire pile and devour them in one immense bite. Bits of wood flung out in every direction as it messily chewed, a small river of wine spilling out to the distant earth below. The accursed brute had taken the village hostage to produce him booze, apparently. I considered whether to stay and study the Titan, or to listen to my quivering gut and depart, when a clarion horn cut through the frigid mountain air. I turned to see riding up the road was an entire army of knights. The pride of Bretonnian chivalry, come to save those in need. There were quite a few of them, hundreds in fact. A dazzling display of color and shining metal bearing heraldries from across the realm. The idiots were going to try and fight that thing. The Bonegrinder giant lumbered to its feet as the knights began their charge. The monster so hysterically large in comparison that they might as well have been seeking to lance a living mountain. Standing easily twice the height of even the mightiest common giant, the Bonegrinder glared down at the brazen men who had come to challenge it. However, the creature suddenly looked unwell, and stumbled a tad before leaning forward with one hand on its stomach. It had never occurred to me until that moment that such an immense creature might suffer from vertigo just from the effort of trying to peer down at such tiny foes. My fears were realized as the behemoth proceeded to vomit, unleashing a disgusting tidal wave of bile into the oncoming knights that obliterated the center of their lance formation. It wasn't hard to hear the screams of those poor Bretonnians who had the misfortune to be struck, their armor and flesh melting in the potent stomach acid. To their credit, the brave warriors continued their charge, reforming their lines and crying out to the lady as they closed the last few hundred yards. Seeming annoyed more than anything, the giant took one unsteady step forward before swinging its other leg on a collision course with the leading knight, who, from what I could tell, appeared to be a paladin that I had actually encountered not a week before. He raised his shield, emblazoned with holy power, but unfortunately that did little to halt the apocalyptic force that struck him. The Bonegrinder's kick smashed into the would-be slayer with such impact that both the man and his steed were converted into a projectile that obliterated every knight directly behind like a meaty cannonball. Still, the Bretonnians had finally reached their quarry, and stabbed at the giant's exposed feet and ankles with all the zeal they could muster. I watched lances shatter with little effect upon their target, the monster's skin so weathered and tough that it may as well have been made of the hardest stone. A few blessed blades managed to pierce the titan's hide, loud grunts of pain and a trickle of blood their only reward for such Herculean efforts. The Bonegrinder had clearly had enough, and with a disgruntled growl leaned down to grab an unfortunate questing knight. The man attempted to sever one of the brute's fingers with his greatsword, but it proved an exercise in futility. At least he did not have much time to contemplate his impending doom, as the knight reeled back its arm and chucked the mounted warrior into his comrades, easily a dozen knights torn apart by the chaotic impact. I noticed the clarion horn cry out once more, and spied what looked to be some heroic lord blasting away on his instrument to signal something. A large collection of knights rallied around him. Based on the way they glowed and the equipment they possessed, they seemed to be Grail Knights. But that shrill call also attracted the ire of the giant. Ignoring the pricks of enchanted steel from the swarming Bretonnians beneath him, the Bonegrinder leaned forward and raised up its left foot to a dizzying height, before bringing it down upon the lord in a fashion that reminded me of an orc shaman spell I had seen once. The impact sent out an impressive shockwave, the thunderclap that emitted from the blow nearly knocking me from my distant perch. When the dust settled, all that remained of the lord and his bodyguard was a bloody smear and a distinctly shaped crater. The knights could take no more. Unable to harm the brute effectively, and being torn apart by its bizarre attacks, the remaining Bretonnians broke and fled. The last score of unfortunate souls slain when the Colossus grabbed one of the peasant hovels and proceeded to hurl it after the terrified riders. Having witnessed the massacre of their supposed saviors, the screaming peasants fled deeper into the valley. I watched as the Bonegrinder giant yelled in protest, surprisingly dismayed at this, and I think trying to command them into returning. Hard enough to understand Grumbarth, the language of the giants, when the creature shouts so loud that it shakes the very roots of the mountains. As you can imagine, this display did not do much to assuage the Bretonnians' terror, and soon the plateau stood empty, save me and the giant. Despite my completely reasonable fear, I decided to continue forwards, and made myself known to the Titan. Being able to speak with the creature, I managed to strike a bargain with it, trading a rather unfortunate amount of some potent dwarf beer in exchange for my life, and a conversation with him. Bolgrug was his name, and I learned what I could about his history, stitching it together with my own knowledge of the world to try and divine as much as I could about the Bonegrinder giants. I even managed to follow him around for a time, as it became clear the Colossus would put up with my presence so long as I did not annoy him. That ended up being quite the curious adventure, the climax being that I did end up finding the nightmarish Doomfire dragon Malodrex, one of the mythical Emperor-class dragons. Bolgrug challenged it, and fought the hellish fire drake in what I expected to be a clash of titans. I was equally disappointed and horrified when the battle only lasted for a few minutes. Despite the Bonegrinder being clawed and burned by the cataclysmic inferno Malodrex summoned forth, the giant clumsily fell over atop the Emperor Dragon, the two monsters colliding and struggling to the ground. Here, Bolgrub managed to wrap his arms around Malodrex and bear-hugged his foe with a display of godlike strength. The primordial reptile struggled to break free, turning its blazing fangs upon the giant, and even calling upon the wind of Akshi to conjure a fiery storm of falling brimstone. Yet this was not enough, and with a great heave, Bolgrug snapped the dragon's spine and crushed its bones, killing it instantly. Truly, there was no monster on this planet safe from the violence of a Bonegrinder giant. As for what my conversation revealed about the wider species of the Bonegrinder, they are a truly ancient race of giants, even by the measure of the elves. Curiously, each of their kind originates from the mysterious mist-wreathed Isle of Albion. Legend tells that in ancient times, even before the coming of chaos, the island of Albion was a paradise. The men of that land were favored by the forgotten gods known as the Old Ones, and entrusted with guarding and maintaining many powerful devices that were critical to something known as the Great Plan. However, everything was thrown into jeopardy, as a series of cataclysms were set into motion that would result in the birth of chaos and the dark gods. The Old Ones, skilled as they were at foresight, knew this apocalypse was coming, and in the time they had left, performed a few final desperate acts to prevent the ruination of the entire world. One of these was the creation of a race of giants to protect Albion, hastily brought into creation with little time for nuance or perfection. These were lesser kin to the fabled Sky Titans of the distant eastern mountains, as they were not quite as large and lacked the intellect to craft mechanical marvels or utilize magic. Here they stayed for millennia, safeguarding the hidden land from invaders and explorers alike, even as the land they defended was twisted into a quagmire, inhabited by a civilization long since fallen into ruin and shamanistic superstition. The Bonegrinder giants, as they came to be known, eventually grew tired and bored of their vigil, and began to wander. While a few remained behind to continue their sacred duty, most of the seemingly immortal ancients left their ancient home by walking, and occasionally swimming, across the sea, until they arrived in various places across the old world. Here they have remained, though over the ages, most of their kind have been hunted down and slain by the champions of the smaller races. However, I suspect that if one were to make the dangerous venture to Albion and successfully arrive upon its shores, they would find the ancient guardians waiting for them with violent intent. Some truth-sayers I have met, supposedly natives of that strange land, even claim that the Bonegrinders repeated the mistake of their Sky Titan brethren, and had young, despite the inevitable inbreeding. Thus, there can be found armies of giants upon Albion, ranging from the common-sized brutes so easily found in the old world, up to their behemoth ancestors. What a sobering thought. Should those hungry titans ever decide to descend upon us all, truly, it would spell doom for the nations of men. That concludes my tale of the Bonegrinder giant. While able to do everything their smaller kin can, and then some, thankfully for all of us, they're also prone to the same weaknesses of being clumsy oafs, and only really interested in eating and drinking. Should you ever be tasked with slaying such an abomination, I would heavily recommend doing your best to survive battling the creature, until it inevitably trips and falls. Should you manage to avoid being crushed, killing a prone Bonegrinder is simple enough work, so long as you can swarm the beast before it stands back up. Not a job that the wise would accept, I'll note. You seem recharged, and ready to get back to work. Good. Just be sure to wait until the sun rises before you head outside. I would hate to find your mangled corpse out there, simply because you were too eager to begin the day. No more questions. I must return to my work. We'll speak again on the morrow. Hey guys! Thanks so much for watching this episode of the Monstrous Arcanum, featuring the Bonegrinder giant. He's not exactly the spookiest monster per se, but quite a few people were requesting this guy, and I wanted to give y'all at least one. So I hope the story told helped lend enough imagery to this titan to make it scary enough for October. In any event, no big ending announcement, just want to thank all of my patrons for their support as always. And of course, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you can be alerted when the next video comes out, as YouTube has been kind of a jerk about that lately. Finally, just want to personally thank my most generous supporters, Sign of the Emperor, Eric, Charles Bode, Jeffrey Raymer, CJ Ubusta, Wendell Short Eyes, and Higgins the Seagull. I hope you all have a lovely day.